Have you ever watched someone you love be treated like they don't belong, right in front of your eyes? What would you do if your own family treated your child like a second-class citizen, making them feel invisible while showering other kids with love? This is the story of how my 7-year-old daughter walked up to her grandmother at Christmas dinner, handed her a small box, and said 5 words that shattered years of fake family unity forever. What was in that box changed everything, and I'm about to tell you exactly how a brave little girl taught an entire family what real love looks like. This video will show you how to recognize emotional abuse disguised as family tradition, how to protect your children from toxic relatives, and why sometimes the smallest voices carry the most powerful truths. If you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family or watched someone you love being treated unfairly, this story will give you the courage to finally speak up. My 7-year-old daughter, Emma, stood in front of that crowded mahogany dining table, wearing the sparkly silver dress she'd picked out herself from Nordstrom's children's section. Her small fingers gripped a carefully wrapped gift box, and every adult in Catherine Harrison's pristine Westchester estate was laughing and clinking crystal wine glasses, too absorbed in their own conversations to notice her standing there. Everyone except me. I was watching closely, my heart pounding with the kind of anticipation that comes when you know something life-changing is about to happen. Emma looked directly at her grandmother, Catherine, lifted that small red box slightly, and said in her clear, confident voice, "Grandma, Dad told me to give this to you if you ever ignored me again." The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Forks froze halfway to mouths, designer jewelry caught the chandelier light as heads turned, and the classical Christmas music faded into meaningless background noise. Catherine Harrison, my husband, Jake's mother, gave one of her practiced, tight smiles, the kind she'd perfected through decades of country club luncheons and charity galas. Her expression suggested this was some adorable childhood game, a sweet misunderstanding that would be cleared up with a gentle laugh and a pat on the head. But when she opened that box with her perfectly manicured fingers, expecting perhaps a handmade ornament or a crayon drawing, she didn't laugh at all. Instead, she screamed, a sharp guttural sound that tore through the formal dining room, louder than sleigh bells, louder than the collective gasps, louder than the silence that followed like a funeral shroud. Other family members rushed over from the living room to see what had caused such a reaction, their faces showing confusion, concern, and growing alarm as they witnessed Catherine's complete composure shatter in real time. But I already knew what was in that box because my husband Jake had packed it 3 months earlier, during one of those late-night conversations when we finally acknowledged what we'd been pretending not to see. He'd told me it was for the day his mother went too far, for the moment when being polite and keeping the peace would become more harmful than speaking the truth. That day had arrived on this perfect December afternoon, in this picture-perfect house, surrounded by picture-perfect people who had spent years maintaining picture-perfect lies. Let me take you back to the beginning of this story, back to when I thought I was marrying into the kind of loving, close-knit family I'd always dreamed of. Let me tell you how my daughter became invisible in a room full of expensive gifts and hollow traditions, and how that small box contained enough truth to expose years of carefully concealed cruelty. The Harrison family estate in Westchester County was everything I'd imagined when I heard the words old money family. The colonial mansion sat on 3 perfectly manicured acres, complete with a circular driveway, formal gardens, and the kind of architectural details that whispered about generations of success and social standing. When Jake first brought me here 6 years ago, I was intimidated by the grandeur but charmed by what seemed like genuine warmth from his family. They appeared to be everything mine wasn't: stable, successful, unified in their traditions, and unwavering in their support for each other. Catherine Harrison commanded respect wherever she went, her silver hair always perfectly styled, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been told no, her opinions delivered with the confidence of someone whose social circle had always validated her worldview. I desperately wanted to belong in this world, to prove that despite my middle-class background and my status as a single mother, I could fit into their sophisticated lifestyle. In those early days, Catherine seemed to welcome me with open arms. She complimented my cooking at family dinners, included me in her book club discussions, and even helped me choose the right wine for special occasions. But looking back now, I can see the subtle signs that should have warned me about what was coming. There were the family group texts that somehow never included me, the casual comments about how different I was from the women in their family, and the way conversations would shift when I entered a room, as if my presence required them to adjust their natural communication style to accommodate an outsider. Emma came into our lives when she was just 2 years old, a bright-eyed toddler with curly brown hair and an infectious laugh that could light up any room. She was my daughter from my first marriage to a man who decided that fatherhood was too much responsibility and disappeared to Seattle, leaving behind only sporadic child support payments and broken promises to call. When Jake entered our world, he didn't hesitate for even a moment. He stepped into the role of father with patience, love, and every ounce of care that a devoted parent should provide. The adoption process took 8 months of paperwork, court, appearances, and legal fees that stretched our budget. But Jake never wavered in his commitment to making Emma legally and permanently his daughter. In our house, we never used words like stepfather or stepdaughter. She was simply his child, and he was simply her dad, bound together not just by love but by choice and legal documentation. Catherine's initial response to Emma seemed positive, or at least politely accepting. She sent birthday cards with generic messages, brought small gifts to holiday gatherings, and made the appropriate grandmotherly sounds during family photos. But even in those early years, I noticed subtle differences in how she interacted with Emma compared to her biological grandchildren. When Sophie and Ryan visited, Catherine would spend hours planning special activities, taking them shopping at expensive boutiques, arranging playdates with children from the right families. Emma would be included in group activities, but never the special one-on-one adventures that created lasting memories and deeper bonds. I told myself these differences were natural. After all, Sophie and Ryan had been in Catherine's life since birth, while Emma was a newer addition to the family dynamic. The first major red flag came during Emma's 3rd birthday party, which we held at Catherine's house because she had offered to host, and I was grateful for the help. Catherine had spent weeks planning an elaborate princess-themed celebration, complete with a professional photographer, a 3-tier custom cake, and party favors that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. But as I watched the party unfold, I noticed that every single decoration, every party favor, every planned activity featured blonde princesses that looked remarkably similar to Sophie, who was also attending as a guest. Emma, with her brown soul, curls and different features, looked like she was a visitor at someone else's party rather than the birthday girl. When I gently mentioned this to Catherine later, she brushed off my concerns with a laugh, saying that all little girls loved princesses, and I was being oversensitive about minor details that children wouldn't even notice. That pattern continued, year after year, becoming more obvious and more painful with each family gathering. Emma would sit quietly during holiday celebrations, while Sophie and Ryan were showered with attention, expensive gifts, and opportunities to help with special traditions like decorating the Christmas tree or choosing the menu for Easter brunch. Catherine had a pet name for each of her biological grandchildren. Sophie was my little sunshine, and Ryan was my brilliant boy. But Emma was always just sweetie or dear, generic terms that could have been used for any child. The matching Christmas pajamas that appeared every December included Emma as an afterthought, often in a different style or color that made it clear she hadn't been part of the original planning. When Sophie lost a tooth, Catherine would visit, with a special pillow and a $5 bill from the tooth fairy. When Emma lost teeth, there was no visit, no pillow, just a reminder that the tooth fairy visited different houses on different schedules. The breaking point came during Thanksgiving dinner when Emma was 6 years old enough to understand. Social dynamics, but still young enough to ask innocent questions that cut straight to the heart of complex adult situations. Catherine had prepared personalized place cards for the children's table, each one featuring photos of Sophie and Ryan from various family vacations and achievements. Emma's place card was blank except for her name written in plain black ink, a stark contrast to the colorful photo-filled cards surrounding her. After dinner, as we were cleaning up, Emma approached me with tears in her eyes and whispered, "Mommy, why doesn't Grandma Catherine have any pictures of me?" That question haunted me for weeks, not just because of the immediate pain it revealed, but because it forced me to confront how many similar moments I had rationalized, minimized, or ignored in the name of keeping family peace. Jake Harrison was a good man caught in an impossible position, torn between loyalty to the mother who had raised him and protection of the daughter who depended on him. For years, he existed in a state of willful blindness, choosing to see his mother's behavior as quirky personality traits rather than deliberate cruelty. When I would bring up specific incidents, the time Catherine forgot to invite Emma to Sophie's sleepover party, or the Christmas morning when every other grandchild received multiple expensive gifts while Emma got a single generic toy from the drugstore clearance rack. Jake would acknowledge that the treatment seemed unfair, but he couldn't bring himself to confront the woman who had sacrificed so much to raise him as a single mother after his father's death. He had been conditioned since childhood to view Catherine as the family martyr, the strong woman who held everyone together through sheer force of will and unwavering dedication to traditional values. The first crack in Jake's denial came during Ryan's 8th birthday party, an elaborate baseball-themed celebration held at a local country club that Catherine had rented for the occasion. Every detail was meticulously planned, from the custom jersey with Ryan's name to the professional batting coach Catherine had hired to teach the children. Emma, who loved baseball and played in a local recreational league, was excited to participate in the activities and demonstrate the skills she'd been practicing. But when it came time for the coached batting session, Catherine quietly directed the instructor to focus on the real family members, leaving Emma standing on the sidelines, watching other children receive personalized attention and encouragement. The exclusion was so blatant, so deliberately cruel, that even Jake couldn't pretend it was an oversight or misunderstanding. That night, he sat on the edge of our bed with his head in his hands, finally admitting that his mother's behavior was intentional and harmful. The second major incident occurred during what should have been a joyful family milestone: Emma's school art show, where her watercolor painting of our family had been selected for special recognition. Jake had been so proud of her achievement that he invited his entire extended family, including Catherine, to attend the evening presentation. Catherine arrived late, spent most of the time talking loudly with other adults, and when Emma's painting was announced as one of the featured pieces, Catherine was in the hallway making a phone call. Later, when Emma ran up to show her the ribbon she had won, Catherine glanced at the painting briefly and said, "That's nice, dear, but we should go. Find Sophie and see if she has anything to show us, too." The dismissal was crushing. Emma's face fell immediately, and she spent the rest of the evening trying to get Catherine's attention by bringing her other artwork, other achievements, anything that might earn a moment of genuine recognition or pride. Jake's transformation from enabler to protector didn't happen overnight, but it was thorough and irreversible once it began. He started keeping a mental inventory of his mother's behavior, noticing patterns that had been invisible when he was focused on maintaining family harmony rather than protecting his daughter's emotional well-being. He saw how Catherine would lavish attention on Sophie and Ryan during family gatherings, while treating Emma like a polite stranger who happened to be visiting. He noticed how birthday and Christmas gifts for his biological nephews were carefully selected based on their specific interests and hobbies, while Emma's gifts were generic items that could have been purchased for any random child. Most importantly, he began to understand how these seemingly small slights were accumulating in Emma's young mind, teaching her that love was conditional, that belonging had to be earned, and that some people were simply worth more than others. based on circumstances beyond their control. The day Jake decided to take action was an ordinary Tuesday in September when Emma came home from school and asked if she could stop calling Catherine Grandma because it felt like lying. She explained, with the brutal honesty that only children possess, that grandmas were supposed to love you and want to spend time with you. And Catherine seemed to think of her as an inconvenience rather than family. That conversation lasted 3 hours, during which Emma shared months of accumulated hurt that she had been trying to process on her own. The parties where she felt invisible, the gifts that made her feel forgotten, the constant sense that she was somehow less important than her cousins. Jake listened to every word, and when Emma finally fell asleep that night, he went down to his home office and wrote a letter that would change everything. He printed out copies of Emma's adoption papers, gathered photos from the day the adoption was finalized, and packed everything into a small red gift box that he stored in our bedroom closet. 3 months later, when Catherine handed Emma a drugstore candle while giving Sophie an iPad Pro and Ryan an envelope containing $650 in cash, Jake knew the moment had arrived. He caught Emma's eye across the room and nodded slightly. This eye, signal they had discussed, the permission she needed to finally stand up for herself. Emma had been carrying that red box in her small purse for weeks, waiting for the day when Catherine's behavior became so obviously unfair that even the most polite observer would have to acknowledge the cruelty. That day was Christmas morning. Catherine Harrison's estate looked like something from a luxury magazine's holiday edition that December morning. Every surface decorated with fresh garland and gold ribbon, a 12-foot Fraser fir dominating the living room with ornaments that had been collected over 3 generations of Harrison Christmases. The dining room table was set with Waterford crystal and Lenox china, the same formal place settings that had graced every special occasion since Jake was a child. The smell of roasted turkey and homemade rolls filled the air, competing with the expensive candles Catherine had lit throughout the house to create the perfect ambiance for what she considered the most important day of her social calendar. Extended family members arrived in luxury cars that filled the circular driveway. Range Rovers, BMW sedans, and Mercedes SUVs that represented the kind of financial success Catherine had taught her children to value above almost everything else. Emma walked into this perfectly orchestrated scene wearing the silver sequined dress she had chosen herself during our shopping trip to Nordstrom, her dark curls styled with a matching headband that sparkled under the chandelier light. She clutched the small red box in her hands, having carried it with her since we left our house that morning, understanding in her 7-year-old way that today might be the day everything changed. The morning proceeded exactly as it had for years. Adults gathered in clusters discussing stock portfolios and vacation homes, while children played with expensive toys that would likely be forgotten by New Year's Day. Catherine held court in her usual spot, directing traffic and ensuring that every family photo would capture the image of prosperity and togetherness that she had spent decades cultivating. Gift-giving at the Harrison house followed a strict protocol that Catherine had established when Jake was young and had maintained with religious devotion for 30 years. She would seat herself in the ornate armchair that had belonged to her mother, surrounded by carefully arranged presents that created a visual display worthy of a department store window. Each gift was opened with ceremonial precision, Catherine providing commentary about the thought process behind each selection and the importance of showing proper appreciation for generosity. Sophie went first, as she always did, unwrapping an iPad Pro with a keyboard attachment and a case covered in genuine Swarovski crystals, a gift worth nearly $1,700 that Catherine presented with obvious pride and satisfaction. Ryan followed, receiving an envelope that contained not only cash, but also a letter of recommendation to Catherine's personal tennis instructor and a promise to pay for private lessons at the country club. When Catherine finally called Emma's name, there was a noticeable pause in the room's energy, as if everyone present understood they were about to witness something uncomfortable but necessary. Catherine held up a small gift bag with handles made of cheap ribbon, The kind of packaging you might use for a co-worker's birthday, rather than a beloved grandchild's Christmas present. Inside was a lavender-scented candle in a plain glass holder, the type of generic gift you might find in a drugstore checkout line, accompanied by a tag that read, "To Emma," in Catherine's distinctive handwriting. The contrast with the previous gifts was so stark, so deliberately insulting, that several family members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, finally unable to ignore what had been happening for years. Emma accepted the candle with perfect politeness, thanking Catherine in her soft voice. But I could see the familiar shutting down that happened when she was protecting herself from emotional pain. The moment that followed will be etched in my memory forever. Not just for what happened, but for the quiet dignity with which my 7-year-old daughter handled a situation that would have challenged many adults. Emma stood up from her place on the floor, walked across the room with purposeful steps that seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet space, and placed the red box directly in front of Catherine's chair. Her voice was clear and unwavering when she spoke those 5 words that would shatter years of pretense. "Grandma, Dad told me to give this to you if you ever ignored me again." The silence that followed was different from the usual Christmas morning chaos. It was the silence of people suddenly realizing they had been complicit in something terrible. The silence of truth finally being spoken in a place where truth had been carefully avoided for far too long. Catherine's reaction to Emma's words revealed everything about her character that polite society had allowed her to hide for decades. Her first instinct was to treat the moment as a joke, to laugh off what she assumed was a child's misunderstanding of adult conversations. She picked up the red box with the kind of condescending amusement she might have shown toward a toddler's attempt to help with cooking, expecting to find inside some harmless craft project or sweet but meaningless gesture. Her perfectly applied makeup and carefully styled hair created a facade of composure, but I could see the calculation in her eyes as she tried to determine how to handle this unexpected disruption to her carefully choreographed holiday celebration. The extended family members who had gathered around the Christmas tree were watching with growing unease, sensing that something significant was about to unfold, but not yet understanding the magnitude of what they were witnessing. The first item Catherine discovered in the box was a photograph in a silver frame, a picture from the day Jake legally adopted Emma, showing him holding our 2-year-old daughter in the courthouse while she giggled and reached for his tie. The photo captured pure joy and love, the kind of moment that defines what family actually means when it's built on choice rather than obligation. Written in gold lettering at the bottom were the words, "Forever Family, Adoption Day 2018, along with the date that had changed all our lives. Catherine's face went through a series of expressions as she processed what she was seeing: confusion, recognition, and then something that looked almost like fear as she realized this wasn't a child's innocent gift, but something much more serious and potentially damaging to her reputation. Beneath the photograph lay a sealed envelope containing documents that would make denial impossible. Official copies of Emma's adoption papers, complete with the state seal and Jake's signature, proving beyond any doubt that Emma was his legal daughter and Catherine's legal granddaughter. The papers were followed by a letter written in Jake's careful handwriting, words he had chosen over the course of several sleepless nights as he tried to find language that would communicate years of accumulated disappointment and determination to protect his child. Catherine's lips moved silently as she read, her face growing paler with each sentence, her hands beginning to tremble as she realized the implications of what Jake had written. The letter said everything we had been too polite to say for years, that her treatment of Emma had been noticed, documented, and would no longer be tolerated. The contents of Jake's letter were both loving and devastating, written from the perspective of a son who had finally found the courage to confront a mother who had taught him to value appearances over authenticity. He reminded Catherine of moments she thought no one had noticed: the birthday parties where Emma had been excluded from special activities, the Christmas mornings where her gifts were clearly afterthoughts, the family photos where Emma was positioned at the edges rather than integrated into the center of the family group. He wrote about watching his daughter's confidence erode year by year, seeing her learn to expect less and ask for nothing, understanding that she was being taught to view herself as a burden rather than a blessing. Most importantly, he made it clear that Emma's place in their family was not negotiable, not conditional, and not subject to Catherine's approval or disapproval. When Catherine finished reading the letter, she looked around the room like a trapped animal searching for an escape route, her carefully maintained composure cracking under the weight of having her cruelty exposed in front of the very social circle she had spent decades trying to impress. The scream that came next wasn't grief or sadness. It was rage, the fury of someone whose power had been challenged and whose secrets had been dragged into the light. She stood up so violently that her chair scraped against the hardwood floor, creating a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard that made everyone in the room flinch. Her accusations came in a torrent of blame and self-pity, directed first at me for supposedly turning Jake against his own mother, then at Jake for allowing himself to be manipulated by an outsider, and finally at Emma for having the audacity to exist and complicate the family dynamics Catherine had worked so hard to control. The aftermath of that Christmas morning was both immediate and profound, like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion once the foundational structure had been removed. We left Catherine's estate that day with a sense of liberation that I hadn't even realized we needed, driving home in our Tesla Model X, while Emma sat quietly in the back seat, not upset or traumatized, but peaceful in a way I hadn't seen in years. She didn't ask questions about what would happen next or whether we would see Catherine again. Instead, she talked about the relief of finally speaking the truth and knowing that her father had been preparing to protect her all along. The weight of pretending to be grateful for cruelties of affection had been lifted from her small shoulders, replaced by the security of knowing she was valued and defended by the people who truly mattered in her life. Jake's transformation from that day forward was remarkable to witness. Years of guilt and torn loyalty had been replaced by clarity and purpose, as if he had finally remembered who he was supposed to be as a father and husband. He stopped making excuses for his mother's behavior and stopped asking Emma to be patient with someone who had never shown her genuine patience or kindness in return. The phone calls from Catherine that had once sent him into hours of anxiety and self-doubt were now met with calm boundaries and consequences. No longer opportunities for manipulation, but simply attempts to restore a relationship that Catherine had systematically destroyed through her own choices. Most importantly, Emma began to blossom in ways that made me realize how much energy she had been spending on trying to earn love that should have been freely given. In the weeks that followed, we created new traditions that were based on joy, rather than obligation, activities that celebrated our authentic family dynamic, rather than trying to fit into someone else's vision of what we should be. Emma helped us bake cookies for our elderly neighbors, participated in choosing gifts for families in need, and spent hours creating handmade decorations that reflected her personality rather than matching someone else's expensive aesthetic. We attended Christmas Eve service at our local church, where Emma was known and loved by people who had watched her grow up, where her contributions to the children's choir and Sunday school were valued and encouraged. These experiences taught her what genuine acceptance looked like, providing a stark contrast to the conditional approval she had been taught to accept from Catherine. The most significant change came in Emma's relationship with her extended family. The cousins, aunts, and uncles who had witnessed Catherine's behavior but had never felt empowered to speak up or intervene. Sophie, who was old enough to understand what had been happening, reached out through her mother to maintain contact. With Emma, sending letters and small gifts that demonstrated the kind of authentic affection Catherine had never been able to provide. These relationships, built on genuine care rather than social obligation, became the foundation for Emma's understanding of what healthy family dynamics should look like. She learned that love doesn't require perfect behavior or constant gratitude. That belonging is a birthright rather than a privilege to be earned, and that sometimes the people who claim to care about family are the ones who understand it least. Looking back on that Christmas morning, I realized that Emma's courage to speak the truth didn't just save her from years of additional emotional damage. It saved all of us from continuing to participate in a system that valued appearance over authenticity, tradition over kindness, and social standing over genuine love. Catherine's refusal to acknowledge Emma as a real granddaughter had been a symptom of deeper issues with control, prejudice, and an inability to understand that family is created through choice and commitment rather than genetics and obligation. By forcing that truth into the light, Emma had given us permission to stop sacrificing our values for the sake of relationships that had never been healthy or sustainable. Today, Emma is confident and secure in ways that would have been impossible if we had continued to subject her to Catherine's toxic influence, and our family has grown stronger through the process of defining our own values rather than accepting someone else's dysfunctional standards. She understands that she is loved unconditionally, protected fiercely, and valued for exactly who she is rather than who someone else thinks she should become. That small red box didn't just contain adoption papers and a letter, it contained the power to transform pain into strength, silence into truth, and a broken family dynamic into something beautiful and authentic that will serve Emma well throughout her entire life. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of a time when you had to choose between keeping peace and protecting someone you love, then I hope you'll take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by other people's inability to see it. Leave a comment below, telling me about a time when you or someone you love found the courage to speak up against unfair treatment. Your stories matter, and they help other people feel less alone in their struggles. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications because there are more true stories coming that explore the complex relationships and difficult choices that shape our lives. Sometimes, the smallest voices do carry the most important truths, and sometimes a 7-year-old's. Courage is exactly what a family needs to finally choose love over tradition, authenticity over appearance, and protection over politeness.